What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from Zoom again, and this time we got round two with Steven of Wolves at the Gate. Great to be able to talk with you, man. I can't believe it's been almost like 4 years or something like that since we spoke in 2019 or something like that.
Yeah, well, it feels like longer because, lockdown in between that.
Yeah, the world has changed quite a bit since we last spoke, I think it's fair to say.
I know we wouldn't have been sitting that close, to each other as we did in that coffee shop.
Yep, exactly. And what's funny is I remember too, I just came back from a festival like that morning. So it was like my first like airport rendezvous interview as well. So that was a good time. The rush from that day was just epic.
Awesome.
Yep. But this covers album that you're putting out is awesome. Excellent choice from covering Billie Eilish to Linkin Park to Foo Fighters and really just an awesome roster. Was this always the intention to create a covers album? Was this always like an idea that you had for Wolves at the Gate, or was it just kind of like a spur of the moment sort of spark of inspiration?
Um, a little bit of both because it was something I talked about wanting to do since like day one of the band. But with the way it came to fruition was kind of spur of the moment. I had been, I just have songs on shuffle all the time. And one of the songs that would come up a lot was this song, Heathens by 21 Pilots. And it was such an interesting song. And so, like, I wanted to sit down and learn what was I liking so much about this song and what was so interesting about it. And as I started like learning the song, I was thinking like, man, this could be a really cool and like dark, heavy like song. And so just as like a kind of like a writing sort of like practice or exercise, I just started working on a cover, and I just did like the first half of the song and sent it to the guys like for fun just to show them. And they're like, yo, you got to finish the song. And so I finished it and sent it to the label, and they were like, do you have more of these? This is amazing. And I was like, no, but I could. And so it was supposed to just be maybe a couple songs, but then it just kind of became too easy and too fun. And so we just started rolling with it and said, let's do 10 songs.
Did you like always want it to be these songs, or was it maybe as simple as like, like throwing a bunch of names in a hat and picking out a song and being like, all right, we'll cover that?
So the ones I definitely knew I wanted to cover for a long time are like songs like Sweetness by Jimmy Eat World. That was a song. That was like the song, 15 years ago.
It's one of the catchiest songs of that movement.
Yeah, it's so good. It's so good. And it's that song is very like important for me musically in kind of my own creativity and what it inspired me in a lot of ways. So yeah, and from there I just started thinking through, and it just became really easy. And we wanted to pick some a few songs that were a little more modern, just to not completely throw people for a loop who aren't as old as I am. But yeah, for the most part, I mean, those were just songs that were, most of them were pretty transformative for me in that time of my life. So,
well, we're all getting old, and especially from that emo movement. I can't wait to be a father, and when my kid says, Dad, I don't want to be just like you, I'll be like, do not bring Good Charlotte into this, young man. So, like, there's a really funny Instagram video. I gotta see if I could find it and send it to you. It's like
awesome.
an emo father like criticizing his son for like trying to be quote unquote normal.
Yeah.
But is this at all though? Maybe like or actually, what I should ask first is performing these songs and cultivating this covers album. Does it resonate with you or feel like you channel a different energy than what we would hear off of the original material?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the goal was to cover these songs in a way that if you didn't know the song, you would just think it's one of ours. So, like, really try to find a way to take ownership of that. But at the same time, for me, it was really fun to do things creatively that don't come second nature to me. Some vocal deliveries or different types of guitar playing. And that's what I was really hoping personally to get out of doing this. Really, the idea was to do this, and hopefully it was doing something good for me creatively, but then we would just share that with our fans too. And so yeah, like it was challenging to take on, you know, a lot of all of the songs vocally, because all of these singers of these songs are phenomenal, and but they all have very different styles. Some are a little bit closer to mine, some are much further apart, and the same thing with the guitar playing too. None of it was like very technical, but a lot of the guitar playing is very unique, and so it's trying to find a way to showcase what was so unique about their guitar playing, but adopt it through sort of our vantage point. So
Yeah. Wolves
yeah,
at
it was.
Oh,
Yeah,
I was just gonna say,
yeah.
Wolves at the Gate does have like a distinct style where like I could tell what would be off of like Captors or types of Shadows or Eclipse,
Mhm.
etc. So like it seems like you have the best of both worlds where you have your own distinct sound, but you have enough to like keep people on their toes. You just be aware there are people who are gonna think that this is a new album, that it is just sort of like the follow up to
Yeah,
Eulogies, right?
yeah, oh yeah, yeah. And there's a number of people who have said, I didn't realize this was a cover until like a minute 30 in. And so I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I see it as a good thing. And yeah, and I'm sure some people won't know any of the songs, and some people know all of them. We've had people say, we just want original material, and everyone's going to have an opinion. But by and large, I think people have really appreciated, something just a little more like fun and lighthearted from us, because that's not generally what comes out of our camp. So
I could just picture like somebody thinking it's original and then discovering, like a little kid discovering that it's a covers, and it's almost kind of like finding out Santa Claus isn't real. They just like cry in a way, and they like just think like, "Oh man, I thought this was like it broke." I'm a diehard Typo Negative fan, but I just learned fairly recently that Cinnamon Girl was a cover. So like
yeah.
breaks my heart. And how many people think that Boys of Summer was originally written by the Ataris?
Yeah, but in the same way, it should make bands, because I've had that happen for me. It when I would find that out about bands that I liked, it made me appreciate that band that much more, because I see how they're interpreting, like I remember back in the day, Thrice, I got the shirt on. They covered an old 80s song called Send Me an Angel. And I didn't realize that was a cover at first, but it sounded so Thrice. And then when I found out it was a cover, I was like, oh, this is so cool. And I love that they took something. They covered a Frodis song on their Alchemy Index. And I didn't know that until like a couple of years after the record was out. And I loved the song. And so, I don't know, I think that there's ways that bands do that that's really cool, and exposes you to new music and makes you think differently about the creative process.
Oh, 100%. It's just one of my favorite cover stories is with Fear Factory, where they did a cover of Cars by Gary Newman, and like mainstream daytime radio picked it up. And there was a backlash where the radio stations were being accused of false advertising, because it would go buy the record thinking it's like a Gary Newman like sounding band, and then it opens up with like a death metal song, and people are like, "What the fuck is this?" So covers are, I think, really fun as a means of creative exploration, as a way of nostalgia, and even like a fun little harmless way of trolling too.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a good way to put it.
But we also didn't get to talk, because the last time I spoke to you, Eclipse was still the newest Wolves at the Gates album. But now we also got Eulogies out, which is a fantastic album. I think it's astonishing how it's your fifth full length album, and you're continuing to make some of the best music that you've done in your career. Was Eulogies meant to be kind of like a follow up or a continuation of Eclipse? Because I know that like when I was speaking to you about Eclipse, there was a lot of reckoning within yourself, and there was almost like a lot of self discovery behind it. So
Mhm.
was Eulogies almost kind of like continuing in that vein of self discovery, or was it more or less a new beginning for Wolves at the Gate?
I think Eclipse was kind of an opportunity to, like you said, step into some self-discovery. And then Eulogies was kind of like the realization of like being comfortable with kind of what came out of, and what we kind of went through to make Eclipse, and kind of were like, okay, I see what we can do, or what's the next move, in kind of elevating what we did on Eclipse. And so yeah, that's kind of how I see that progression. And I think a lot of our albums tend to do that. It's like you see lots of potential in what you did. Like for Eclipse, I was like, okay, there's a lot of things I felt like we did well, but a lot of things that I would love to improve on moving into Eulogies. And I think for this next record cycle of songs that we're working on, it's kind of that self-discovery again of like, okay, let's kind of flip everything on its head again and see what's a new iteration of songs we can put out. So
because again, like, types and shadows versus 5 by 5, like, versus, like, captors, like, it just seems like every album plays in a way by its own rules while also having its own foundation. Does every album start off with a vision in a way, or is it a very, like, a sort of scientific experimental process?
it's definitely experimental because there's never really a big period of time in between an album when it gets finished and when I start writing the next batch of songs. But that like in between period is usually where I'm just like writing stuff, and some of it is like B-sides of like what could have been on the previous record, but some of it is like new things moving in a new direction that as I start writing, I start going, okay, I really like what I'm doing here. Let's let the past, stay dead. And this is a way I can see we can move forward. So it is kind of like experimenting. You start trying stuff. Because like you write songs and then the creativity really is done. And then you record what you were creative in. And so there's that gap while you're tracking that isn't nearly as creative as the writing. And then by the time I'm done recording, I'm like, okay, I'm ready to like, because recording it's kind of brutal,
Okay.
takes over and over and over again,
It's almost kind of like a production thing where like you're making the same thing over and over again, and then you kind of like doze off, and then you fuck up like the whole line of everything else. So like
Yeah.
it definitely gets rather deteriorating in a way. But to me, one thing that does really, I think, kind of like bring every Wolves at the Gate album together is like the different like vocal collaborations, like between you and Nick, the way that you're able to express your different vocal sides and different usages of your voice. But when it comes to singing together or even like writing the lyrics together, do both of you kind of need to be in the same frame of mind or be in the same emotional headspace when singing or writing lyrics together in order to make like it sound like the lyrics or the melodies or vocal parts belong together?
Yeah, I'm like a super important thing that Nick and I do, which may just sound pretty trivial, is we just talk. We talk a lot about. We never really like track a song without like talking about it first and kind of just having a conversation about it. Because the nice thing is that I tracked all of Nick's vocals for almost all of our albums, and so we kind of have this relationship of trying to us kind of working together for me to try and get him in the mindset of where the song is at emotionally. And then I know Nick is capable of so much. And so I try to use it as an opportunity to kind of help coach him to where he can go. And so it's fun. It's very collaborative, and it's pretty relaxed too, which I think gives us the best end product.
I've heard the songwriting process and the collaborative process called many things, but never relaxed. So, but
Yeah.
that's a really very depending on like what the material is about that you're singing about too. Does it almost feel like that process of collaborating together, or even just by yourself? It seems like you channel a different energy depending on the lyrical context.
Yeah, like, and also depending on like because if a song has a lot of dynamic, there may be a time where we just need different things, and in that's where there may be a time where I need Nick's just most monster vocal take, and that's not the time for me to be like introspective or like thoughtful with him. I want to get him pumped up, and I'm usually trying to find ways to just tell him like unleash the beast, let's see it. But then there's other times where I'm trying to help him understand how he can deliver something emotionally. And so, yeah, nothing's really ever the same. And that part is challenging, but it's super rewarding, and Nick, we have a lot of trust between the two of us, and so we're able to be patient with one another, because that does take time.
And also, one thing that I think is very admirable, and I think your fans find admirable, is that you've never been shy about expressing either certain demons or certain trials and tribulations that we all have to face with. And I think it always does make great fuel for creativity. Famous saying, "When we are at our worst, art is at its best." In a way, but when that can be the fuel to the fire sometimes, does that make the songwriting process just as deteriorating as it can be cathartic?
Um, to me, it's more so of a release. I don't ever feel I don't ever feel like emotionally beat down by um, you know, the content of what I'm talking about, because that actual moment, whatever I'm working through, the moment is far worse than my recollection of it, and so that's more so an opportunity to just release it. And, um, for me, I generally don't tend to write about things that are like, I've never made a song about something that was like hurting me in that moment, because um, I want to be able to kind of step back, and I always write my thoughts out, when I'm thinking through those things or I'm feeling certain things. I always write my thoughts out, but I like to be able to kind of step back and look at it and go, okay, is this really saying what needs to be said? And then how do I creatively and artistically express that in a thoughtful way? Because I want to be careful about, um, I think honesty is really good, but sometimes honesty is just being honest for the sake of being honest, but not being helpful.
There's some things that even if it's honesty that don't need to be said. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like you can be honest if I think that that song sucks, but like what does that accomplish by expressing that? You know what I mean?
yeah. I like to find ways, to help people. Like I want to identify with others with the pain and struggle of things that I work through, but I don't want to be dragging them into my depression or my sadness or my sorrow, to the point that they can't get out of it either.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, what's the lowest part of the valley that I can touch that is just, it's going to help somebody in that journey, but not drag them down, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
While also not ignoring, you know, the low, the depths of a low part. So,
Absolutely, because sometimes I said that when darkness and pain is like the fuel behind the fire, that sometimes the artist can be victimized by their own product, as I like to
yeah.
say. But I've always said that art is life, and it can grow and it can develop, even die sometimes as well. Do you want every album that you make, even for this covers, to maybe evolve with you and develop new meaning as you evolve as an artist, or do you prefer if Captors remains in 2012, 5 by 5 remains in 2014, etc., like a snapshot?
I think some songs are snapshots and other songs are, the goal is for it to be more timeless. Sometimes you just have to capture a moment in time and let that be. Like, we wrote a song called Counterfeit that I could apply to a lot of different circumstances, but for me, like this song Counterfeit and History were songs kind of looking at the political climate of our country. And while there are things that have been obvious in the past and will be throughout the future, those songs to me just make me think about a time period and what was going on and the frustrations that I felt, and expressing that. But it's not something I like carry and hold on to, because there's angst in those songs for sure, and frustration and anger at yeah, what I was seeing. But I don't like carry that with me today in 2023.
Yeah.
But there are other songs, that we've written, like on Types and Shadows, called Lowly, that just describes, my ever present thought process. So, yeah, I think every song's kind of unique in that sense.
Definitely. Definitely. And speaking of which, I did want to talk about two Wolves at the Gates anniversaries, one being last year and one being next year. Last year was the 10-year anniversary of the debut. Captors,
Hmm.
fantastic. You hit the ground running with that debut. I think it's still a fantastic album. And then 5 by 5 is going to be 10 next year. So, how would you say the evolution has sort of changed, and what was the sort of thought process going into it? Because I know that you did release like the Prisoner of War EP and Pulled from the Deep and We Are the Ones. Like you released those EPs, but with those albums, what was the sort of like thought process?
Like from Captors to 5 by 5.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I guess, Captors first album, every band is like they've been writing their first album their whole life. That's like it's everything they're working up to, and so there's something always unique and special about that. And a lot of it is because you have no experience being a professional band as well. What we learned through Captors was really the art of the live show and capturing emotion. There's emotion that you sometimes think you're capturing when you're kind of just in your basement working on songs, but when you have to play those same songs, hundreds of times, you start to realize what's connecting, what's not connecting, what feels good live, what doesn't feel good live. And so 5 by 5 was really birthed out of, just realizing, all these songs we're gonna have to play a ton, and certain things may like sound great in some contexts, but we want to write songs that are going to sound great in all contexts. And so that's really what I think 5 by 5 kind of came out of, particularly, this live. What feels good live? What will people respond to? What do we like? So
Yeah, and since then you've been a solid state veteran since day one. I mean, I feel like I mean I could be wrong, but it almost seems like you guys are one of the veterans. You were on solid state before Devil Wears Prada or Fit for a King or even Norma Jean. So and then with new bands like Becoming the Archetype or Silent Planet or even Phineas coming on board, it seems like you're almost kind of like the OG. I feel like You Are to Solid State is like what Typo Negative was to Roadrunner almost.
it's kind of weird to think about for us because we grew up listening to bands like Norma Jean, who were originally from on Solid State back in the day, and As Cities Burn, Haste the Day. And when we got signed, a lot of those bands were the OGs at that point. But it is. I guess it's true to some degree. I can't deny that. We've been on the label for a long time, put out a lot of albums, but it feels weird thinking about us in that context. But they've been great to us, and so we've felt no need to go work somewhere else. They've given us the freedom to be ourselves, which is most important. And that was the thing I remember saying to Adam, our A&R. We've had the same A&R for all these years too, which is unprecedented.
That's a rare situation right there.
Yeah, and we were the first band he signed, so we both kind of like come up together. And one of the first things I told Adam was like, what you're seeing right now is who we are, and I if you want us to be anything different than that, then this isn't a good fit. And he's like, no, it's why I love you guys. And so he's become more of a friend than somebody I work with, so it's a great relationship.
That's awesome when you can have a relationship like on the business side as much as because then it becomes not just an artistic journey, it becomes almost like a movement in that regard as well. And I think Solid State's roster alone is all we need to bring back Warped Tour. So
one of these days we have to do a Solid State tour. We've been talking about it for like 10 years. Maybe one of these days it'll happen.
Oh, please. I mean, get Devil Wears Prada, you guys, maybe bring back Sleeper, which would be cool. Phineas, I think, is one of the best new bands in the genre as well, so we got to make it happen. Oh, and Fit for a King, of course.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, you could say any band and it'd be a great tour. So
Yeah.
there's lots of great bands on the label.
In fact, I'm looking at all of their. I'm looking at their current roster right now as we speak. I pull up a
Yeah,
bunch of stuff during this interview.
yeah.
I think I covered every single. The only Silent Planet is the only one I have left. I think to check off the list. So,
Oh yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Well, Garrett will be a great conversation, so you should definitely try and get in touch with him.
I bet. And the final question I wanted to ask you, silly question, and I've been asking a bunch of bands this because regardless, I think Wolves at the Gate has many different sounds that resonate with many different fans that could appeal to multiple audiences. But let's be real, with the Solid State label behind it, the clean singing and screaming behind it, you guys are going to be labeled as metalcore one way or another. It's almost like a requirement at this point. Is there just but I always like asking people what metalcore is because a lot of people say it's music that has singing and screaming in it, but I would never call a band like Amorphous or like In Flames a metalcore band or something like that. I heard the bridge, it's like the bridge between metal and hardcore, but
Yeah.
but heavy metal bands like Slayer or whatever don't have the melodies that we hear in metalcore, and neither does hardcore, old school hardcore. So like, what would you say makes a metalcore band a metalcore band?
Well, obviously, it's a bit of a moving target, because metalcore basically gets determined by who the biggest band is that people think is metalcore. But yeah, I've always understood metalcore as, bands that take, essentially the riffs and the rhythms from metal music and hardcore. Because metal was known for its pace and velocity, and hardcore was known for its groove and really like halftime breakdowns. And really what to me, metalcore was just taking really the best parts of metal and the best parts of hardcore. And that's why when you listen to a metalcore song, it should have something that's fast and aggressive and that's riffy, and there needs to be moments of halftime breakdown goodness. I don't think it needs to have any singing at all to be metalcore. That's just something that I think got introduced in bands like Killswitch Engage. When I think of metalcore, I honestly think of Killswitch Engage. That's one of the bands I think about, because I think that there were lots of bands that did it before them, but they, to me, kind of like stamped what metalcore looks and sounds like and how it can be done at a high level. So, I mean, they're an incredible band, and I'm sure there's some, diehard metalcore history buffs that are going to be like, no, it was this band. It's like, sure.
I mean,
that's just what it is for me when I think of it.
The way I look at it like this is like I consider the first metalcore album where it was Of One Blood by Shadows Fall, maybe even Somber Eyes in the Sky. Yep, like Shadows Fall was almost kind of like the Nirvana of it, and I'll get so much shit for this. I don't care. I don't think Nirvana is the best grunge band. Sure, maybe were they like the OGs of it? Sure. No, you're not. But Killswitch Engage is like the Alice in Chains of that movie.
Yeah, they had the most commercial success. Shadows, it's really a lot of those New England bands that's where a lot of it came from.
Yep.
And so honestly, if there's a few like documentaries you can watch that even like Killswitch has a documentary kind of like cataloging like how they got to where they got. And they pay homage to all these other bands like Shadows Fall and God Forbid that were from that scene who were developing that sound, but somebody has to get big, right, for it to be a thing.
Yeah.
And Killswitch was really the one that kind of burst through that.
And on top of that, when you put out the first album in 2012, metalcore was in such a transitional period from the Killswitches, Unearths, As They Lay Dyings to what we would later see in bands like Bring Me the Horizon or Asking Alexandria in a way, which have a lot of distinct differences but still fall into that category. I've always thought that Wolves at the Gate was a really good bridge band between the old and the new, because I know Killswitch and Unearth fans who wouldn't touch an Asking Alexandria record with a 10-foot pole, but they would. But you guys have kind of like that nice bridge, so where like I feel like the fans of the later stuff and the OG stuff would appreciate you guys.
Yeah, and I think that just comes down to influences, and I think that's the reason why we tend to lean more towards bands that were, I would say, rough around the edges in the right ways. Like I love Norma Jean because of it's just raw, and yeah, and like this they're raising a ruckus, and bands like Killswitch, it's about big guitar tones and big riffs and not trying to impress people and with like some sort of showy solo. They're just writing great songs. And bands like Unearth that just riff monsters, that there was more of a thought of musicality and but yeah, it's interesting. Basically, metalcore got commercialized, and that's why we saw a bunch of commercial expressions of that style. And I think we were kind of caught in the middle because we still were like so heavily influenced by older bands that we were a little odd to, I think, a lot of people that were into the newer metalcore. But hopefully we're just given a different flavor for folks other than what was popular at the time.
I love going to like a Fit for a King show or like a Silent Planet show and overhearing people, I discovered this new band called Wolves at the Gates. I'm like, kid, you got a whole catalog to catch up on. So,
yeah, and that's fun when you find a new band and it's like, oh, they have all these albums,
Where have they been all my life?
Well, it's cool that there's people finding our band, this late in the game. That's cool for us. That's exciting, and that's what we're looking forward to with the cover album. Hopefully it will introduce new listeners to our band and get them ready for the next album that we're working hard on. So
this covers album is epic, and I can't wait. Hopefully it doesn't give you the same curse as the Ataris. That's the only thing I get a little anxious about. But
I think we'll be all right.
Yeah, definitely. But before we go, I want to thank you so much for coming back on the show and for another fantastic conversation. I still remember our last conversation like it was yesterday, so I always learn a thing or two when I'm talking to you or listening to Wolves at the Gate. Is there just anything else that you'd like to promote? You mentioned you're working on a new album now. We got this covers album. Any tours that you're allowed to plug?
We're heading out in a month to Europe and UK for a couple weeks, playing some shows out there and festivals. So very excited to do that. And I'd say that we're playing one of Haste the Day's comeback shows, but that's been sold out for months now. So there's no point in people if you're only hearing about it now.
Is it the New York City? Is the Brooklyn show one of them?
No, we're playing their hometown in Indy.
Oh, well, that's going to be epic. Because I was about to say, just if you're playing Brooklyn, sneak me in.
I would have, man. Yeah, but we just couldn't make that work.
Fair enough. But thank you so much, everybody. We are here with Wolves at the Gate, Lost in Translation, epic covers album. Be sure to pick that up and check out their latest album, Eulogies, if you haven't already. We'll see you next time on Heavy New York.